Hi, my name is Liam Wynn with Wolf King Brewing, and ever since I brewed this beer right here, there have been tons of boys in my yard. Hello everyone and welcome to a homebrew recipe showcase. My name is Liam Wynn here with Wolf King Brewing, and today I'm here to show you this beer. This is my strawberry milkshake style IPA called Strawberry Silk Sheets. This is the first batch of this beer that I've ever created, and I wanted to share it with you guys and let you know how it's made. So to start off, we'll talk very briefly about what a milkshake style IPA is. It's quite simple, really. All the hop heads got tired of hops and they wanted to add something else to their beers to emulate a different drink. So this is beer that doesn't taste like beer, to put it incredibly simply. This beer is designed to emulate a milkshake, in this case a strawberry milkshake, with the use of certain adjuncts to increase mouthfeel, the actual thickness, the viscosity of the beer, as well as certain flavors that are associated with ice cream and or milkshakes. These combinations make essentially, in my case, a 7.5% alcohol by volume milkshake with some carbonation. It's wonderful. It's absolutely wonderful. It's no question to me why these are popular nowadays. Some people scoff at the milkshake IPA craze, but they're just delicious through and through. So I decided to try my hand at one, and here's what we've got. So I'll give you guys some general advice on the style, as well as share kind of specifically what I did to get to this end point here. I'm very happy with the way this beer turned out. I think it looks, smells, and tastes fantastic. I'm even happy with the label, believe it or not. Oh, that's good. So for this particular beer, it was relatively straightforward. I did build the recipe from scratch, but I took some tips and cues from different articles and websites. There's a good article from Brew Your Own that I will post in the description. You guys can read with some helpful information on this style. But the first step in getting the proper mouthfeel and viscosity beer here is to mash a little bit higher than you're used to. Now, the addition of unfermentable sugars are going to make this beer thicker than an average beer anyways. So don't focus too much on the mash temperature. I would just say plan on starting about 156. If you can hold it there, perfect. That will leave just enough unfermentable sugars to give the beer some body and really emulate that thick, mouthful of milkshake kind of thing that you want. In fact, mouthful of milkshake was my nickname in college. Now the other side of this is the boil. This is relatively unique except for when it comes to hazy style or New England style IPAs, and that is that I did a 30-minute boil. There's brewing purists who will tell you otherwise, but 30-minute boil and mine came out just fine, so I recommend doing the same. Now the other part of this that's really important in getting that creamy, soft mouthfeel, very low bitterness, exactly what you want for this kind of style, is going to be the sulfate to chloride ratio. This is important with any beer, but particularly this style, it's going to be extremely important to get a nice round texture with no sharp edges anywhere. Now the sulfate to chloride ratio that I ended up with for this particular batch, now keep in mind I started with reverse osmosis water with absolutely zero mineral content, and then I added minerals to style. I ended up with about 144 parts per million of chloride and then 80 parts per million of sulfate. So that's about 0.55 in terms of the sulfate to chloride ratio. But the most important thing is you want to keep that low. Ideally, you want to keep it around 0.5. Very important again, because that's going to give you a very round beer with no sharp flavors present, no sharp bitterness. The opposite, in other words, a 2-to-1 sulfate to chloride ratio would be used in like a light hoppy beer, for example. That's going to give you that crisp, sharp, biting bitterness. We don't want any of that here. So 1 to 2 is a perfect place to start. Different brewers will have different recommendations or personal experience about this, but that's where I ended up here, and honestly, it worked out really well for me. So now that we know more about the water that I used to create this beer, I'm going to talk now about the grain bill or the grist. It's really simple, honestly. And again, you'll get different answers depending on who you ask about this. But I'm going to give you a very straightforward baseline. Okay, you can take this and tweak it as you want, but it's a very high adjunct style. In other words, you're going to have a very high ratio of adjuncts to your base malt. Now, my baseline that I'm going to give you, which is similar to what I used here, is going to be 60 to 65% of your base malt. I used a 2-row, a pale ale malt would be fine. Even a Pilsner malt would probably work. I used also 15 to 20% flaked oats. I think I ended up about 18% but the oats are going to give you that soft, creamy texture that you really want. And then 10 to 20% wheat malt. I used Brewer's white wheat malt. That base should give you just about what you need to get a beer with a nice, soft texture, a good round mouthfeel, good thickness and body to it, as well as a good base for adding other flavors, which to this particular beer are strawberry and vanilla. Now, for example, if you're doing a 5-gallon batch, figure about 70% efficiency. That would give you 9 pounds of your base malt, or 2-row in this case, which I recommend, 3 pounds of flaked oats, and 2 pounds of white wheat. Again, you can tweak that however you want, but that's going to give you, right about those proper ratios to get something like this, which I think worked very well. So do what works best for you, experiment around with it, but that's a good place to start. And depending on your efficiency, that's going to give you anywhere from a 6.5 to an 8% alcohol by volume beer. This one ended up being a little over 7.35, I believe. Yeah. So keep in mind, you're also adding fruit to this beer during fermentation. So the alcohol by volume numbers are fudged a little bit. I'll just be honest with you. Now keep in mind, if you're getting lower efficiency and you want to bump it, or maybe you want to do a double IPA version of this, 8-9%, even higher, don't be afraid to just use a little bit of dry malt extract to bump you up to where you want to be. I mean, if your efficiency's low, certainly add a pound or 2 of grain to the recipe that I gave you, and that'll help you out quite a bit. But there's no shame in just adding some dry malt extract to boost your alcohol by volume, and it should have very little effect on the finished beer. Now let's talk about hops. We are going to use a lot, but I chose hops that I felt would work well with my base beer. The other thing to keep in mind is that I'm doing an extremely small boil addition, extremely small. You can actually do no boil addition and just add all of your hops at flame out in terms of bittering, and you'll get there as far as IBUs. My IBUs were relatively low for this beer. I think I ended up around 21 or 22. I used a 1/4 ounce of Magnum at 13.5 alpha acids for 30 minutes, in my 30-minute boil. So a very small addition, that's about 7 grams of hops, just to boost my IBUs kind of close to where I wanted them to end up. And then moving forward after the 30-minute boil, at flame out, I added 1 ounce each of Citra and Amarillo, and I let that sit in a hop stand for 15 minutes around 190 degrees. That did boost my IBUs a little bit to help me get to my target, as well as leave some of the aroma and flavor of those hops intact. So that's why I don't add these to the boil, because those compounds in the hops that give us those nice flavors that we like so much, they're extremely volatile, and they will boil off within 5 minutes. So even if you do a 5, 10, 15-minute addition, you're going to lose a lot of character from those hops. So at flame out, let them sit for 15 minutes. You're going to get some good flavors and some bitter. Now, this style, along with many other IPA styles, really shines through in its dry hops. So I used a total of 7 ounces of dry hops, and the way that I spaced those out was at high krausen, I used 2 ounces of Amarillo. I threw in 2 ounces in a hop boiling bag, and then I'm going to leave those in there for 3 days, so kind of through the rest of fermentation. Now, you don't have to be so concerned about oxygen pickup at this point, because you're still doing active fermentation, so the beer is still producing carbon dioxide. So it's going to purge all the oxygen you let in out of the fermentation vessel. So you don't have to purge the fermenter at this point, but you will later on in the dry hop. Now, speaking of the other dry hops, we'll get to that in just a minute, because after we do that initial dry hop, I'm going to remove that bag after 3 days. So the high krausen dry hop, I'm going to let those sit in the beer for 3 days. I don't want any longer than that, because I don't want to pull any green vegetal kind of flavors into the beer. Those would not be welcome in a style like this. So I yank them out after 3 days. When my fermentation has slowed, that's when I'm going to add my fruit. Now, just to briefly touch on adding fruit to beer, there's many different ways you can do it. Extracts, purees, you can use real fruit if you're crazy. There are purists and traditionalists out there who will tell you that using real, local, fresh fruit is the only way to go. I think it's a nightmare. I'd like to highly disagree. To each their own, certainly, but the problem with using real fruit is it's a fucking mess. You're left with seeds everywhere. If you're juicing it, you got strawberry juice all over the place. It's not the worst problem to have, especially if you got somebody to lick it off you. But it's just a pain in the ass to deal with, and there's easier avenues, especially in today's world. Now, I am a big advocate of just fruit extracts and fruit flavorings, but for this particular beer, I wanted this pink color that I got. So I knew I need actually a high content of real strawberries or concentration of strawberries in order to get to this pink color that I want. So what I ended up using is actually a Dr. Smoothie base. It was a 40-ounce bottle, and I used it in a 2.5-gallon batch. So you may want to pick up 2 bottles, even though, we're getting high up in terms of the amount of fruit that I'm adding to there. I promise it's worth it because you want this beer to be heavily fruited. The benefit of using what I used is that it was concentrated, so I was able to get away with using a little bit less. Not only that, but it gave me the dark color I wanted and it had no seeds. I didn't have to deal with any fruit or contamination. It was pasteurized, so I didn't have to deal with that at all. It's just the best way to go, or was the best way to go in my opinion. Not only that, but it saved some money because those fresh fruit purees can get extremely expensive. I believe I spent around $18 for this bottle of, they call it Dr. Smoothie, 100% strawberry smoothie base, and I'll put a picture up on the screen right there. I don't know, maybe here, somewhere. You'll see it. I got this on Amazon. And it's shelf-stable, 40-ounce bottle. I just dumped the entire thing into the fermenter after fermentation had slowed, and I let it ferment out completely. Now, my final gravity for this particular beer stabilized right about 1018. That's what you're gonna expect from this, 1017 to 1022. You want this beer to finish sweet because it's supposed to taste like a fucking milkshake, dude. So it's supposed to be sweet. So don't be afraid. You don't want this to attenuate fully where it's dry because that's not gonna do you any favors. So part of that comes from the addition of lactose. Last 5 minutes of the boil, you had a pound of lactose for a 5-gallon batch. I did a 2.5-gallon batch, so I did 8 ounces. So very simple, but it's gonna keep your final gravity higher to keep a sweeter, again, rounder mouthfeel kind of base beer. So as far as the strawberry flavoring that I use, one thing that I was unsure about was if you look at the ingredients, it does contain some other juices. There were pear juice and grape juice listed. This might be a problem for some. It's not 100% strawberry puree, but I just took a chance anyways, and I gotta be honest, it paid off. It tastes delicious. I don't notice any weirdness from grape or pear flavors. I'm guessing that they were using extremely small amounts to begin with in that smoothie base. It was just funny because Dr. Smoothie calls it 100% strawberry. So debatable. The important thing was that there were no sugars added, no funky chemicals that were going to interfere with fermentation or leave any kind of weirdness in the beer. So always check the ingredients of any kind of fruit addition that you're using. Now, I let that ferment out completely and then I cold crashed it to 36 degrees. I just took the entire fermenter and popped it in my beer fridge. So once it was at 36 degrees, I added more dry hops. Now for the second round of dry hops, it was 3 ounces of Amarillo and 2 ounces of Comet. Now it's a total of 5 ounces in my 2-day cold crashed dry hop. So what I'm doing is I'm dry hopping for 2 days, 48 hours at 36 degrees. I believe it was Denny Kahn that mentioned this in his show, where dry hopping for 2 days at, low temperatures, cold crash temperatures, gives you insane hop aroma. And I gotta say, I'm a huge advocate of it. Now for anything that gets dry hopped, that's what I do. I dry hop it for 2 or 3 days cold and I just get insane hop aroma. So I don't exactly know the science behind that, but just know that it works and that's how I did it. You can also dry hop for 3 to 5 days just at room temperature or fermentation temperature, and you'll get much the same result or a similar result. But if it ain't broke, don't fix it. This worked perfectly for me, so it's what I'm sticking with from now on. But at this point, I basically had a finished beer that was uncarbonated, and very simple. I kegged it up, I burst carbonated it. I used the Brewlosophy short and shoddy carbonation method of burst carbonation. Now I had 2.5 gallons, so I had a half batch. So I kicked it up to 50 PSI and held it there for about 6 hours, and I got perfect carbonation somehow. You get lucky sometimes when you use this method. It is more dangerous. You do have more risk of overcarbonating or undercarbonating your beer using this way, but it worked fine for me. And I mean, you see it yourself. This head has stuck around for this entire time I've been recording, which is going on like 25 minutes that I poured this, and it's chilling. So proof's in the pudding, chief. Now, when adding to the keg, you're gonna wanna add your vanilla extract. There's different ways you can add vanilla to beer. You can make a tincture, you can soak vanilla beans in vodka and just dump that into the fermenter. I use the equivalent of, in a 5-gallon batch, I would use 3 ounces, but do it to taste. Maybe do 1 ounce at a time and wait for it to get to the point where you like it and you think it tastes like it should, and then you're done. But for this recipe, I would suggest about 3 ounces. You can even go up to 4. It's supposed to be an ice cream beer, so shit, man, just add all the vanilla that you want, okay? But that's about it. This beer came out wonderful. I'm super stoked with it. I'm very happy with the results. I will be brewing it again with different fruits. If you have any questions, drop them in the comments section below and I'll try my best to help out. But I hope you guys enjoyed this showcase and I will see you all for the next one.